NBA still leads the day as C.J. Miles needs a reality check and a nice quote from the New York Times on Marvin Williams. But today, I dig college football a little bit. We'll talk some Utah and BYU as tip-off will kick off a little college football coverage on this August 22nd. Boom, 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 boom. Timmy Lincecum, the man, struggles all year. Boom, 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 boom. Throws zeros across the board against the Dodgers last night. Boom, 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 boom. Pop, 1-2 straight in LA looking for the 3-game sweep tonight. Boom, 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 boom. Boom. Hate the Dodgers. Boom, 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 boom. Hate the Lakers too. Boom, 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 boom. Boom. How is everybody? A little baseball pennant race fever. Though I have to admit I just watch it online. Don't watch a lot of it. There's an interesting one with the Giants, by the way. If I have this timed right, Melky Cabrera's 50-game suspension ends in after the wild card round of the playoffs. And I kind of like considering, I don't know if you follow the story, but he got caught for illegal doping, but then 50 or testosterone or whatever, and then he proceeded to make a fake website and did a bunch of things like that. And I don't know, as an organization, I kind of feel like someone should stand up and just say, actually, you're not coming back. You let us down. You cheated. Not a part of it. We'll see. All right. I hope everyone's well. Congratulations to all the parents that got through a summer and their kids are off to another year of school. And hopefully everyone got their first day of the year pictures. I know Scotty G's little boy Spike off for 5th grade. And a lot of Salt Lake schools start today, so congratulations to everybody for that. Thanks to all of you that are sticking with us throughout the summer. We finally, as of August 20th, have had a slight dip in the numbers. The podcast has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger throughout the summer. And then we had our first dip in numbers a little bit this week. Phil Johnson and I are scheduled to sit down today and do an interview about where the Jazz are in the NBA. We'll reach him up in Bear Lake, so that should be good for you this week. I will relaunch some of the Hometown Heroes this week as well. So 2 podcasts coming your direction. If you have anything you want to hear, people you want to hear, let me know. I was trying to get a hold of my buddy Alan Horton of the Timberwolves. He's wrapping up his WNBA season and works at an insane level. I don't know if I have time. I'm like, oh my gosh, come on, dude. But we'll see. And how about this, guys? And I like this guy so much that I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But C.J. Miles in the Cleveland Akron Beacon Journal basically says that my thing coming this summer wasn't about money. It was about the best basketball situation. I think a lot of people feel I am who I am going to be, but I don't believe it. Obviously, this organization feels otherwise. That's kind of debatable since it was only a 2-year, $4 million deal. There's no quote here, but he says, Miles contends he wasn't able to display his entire skill set with the Jazz because he was simply playing the role asked of him behind more established stars. Can we have a minor reality check here for a second? Let me go to the numbers. I keep a stat that's called jack percentage. How often do you jack up a shot? 2 years ago, in the 10-11 season, this wouldn't surprise. Kobe leads the league at 1.5, which means about every minute and a half he's on the floor, he uses a possession. Carmelo was 2nd, Derrick Rose was 3rd, Amari was 4th, Durant was 5th, Kevin Martin was 6th, Dwayne Wade was 7th, Russell Westbrook was 8th, Michael Beasley was 9th, which should worry Phoenix. LeBron was 10th, Bargnani was 11th, Monte Ellis 12th, Dirk 13th, Lou Williams, who's now in Atlanta, was 14th, Blake, and Doug Collins corralled that, Blake Griffin was 15th. I mean, this is who it should be, right? Jameson 16th, Danny Granger 17th, Brooke Lopez on New Jersey then 18th. He still is, but I mean just that. Okay, and then there were 2 names that just shouldn't be on this list. Jordan Crawford of Washington was on this list at 20th. Frankly, I think Nick Young shouldn't have been on this list. And then all of a sudden you slide down a little bit. C.J. Miles used a possession every 2 minutes he was on the floor. That's the same as LaMarcus Aldridge, as Zach Randolph, as Marcus Thornton, who I think is an enormous gunner, as Carlos Boozer, as Tyreek Evans, as Joe Johnson didn't use possessions that often. Dwight Howard didn't that often. Frankly, that year he used more possession time than Al Jefferson. Go to last year. Interesting thing I discovered here, by the way. Al Jefferson went way up. Al Jefferson went from using a possession every 2 minutes to one every about, I gotta do a little math in my head, about 1 minute every 45 seconds. So Jefferson went up. But again, who is it? In 2011-12, it's Kobe, it's Carmelo, it's Russell Westbrook, it's LeBron, it's DeMarcus Cousins. Part of the reasons why his numbers are so big and he's overrated. Durant, Wade, Kevin Love, Derrick Rose was healthy, Darren Williams in New Jersey, Jordan Crawford flies in there again. I mean, holy smokes, is he the biggest gunner in the league? And if anyone thinks everyone probably looks at him, oh, he scored 15 points a game. He shoots 40%, 29% from three, barely goes to the line, and just shoots every time he gets the ball. He's terrible. Monte Ellis, Al Jefferson, Lou Williams, same names, right? Antoine Jameson, Kyrie Irving, Josh Smith, LaMarcus Aldridge, Michael Redd was interesting to have in here. But again, all the names you'd suspect. Tim Duncan was surprisingly high in here. Through some filters, by the way. You have to play a certain amount of minutes and do some things. But these are the guys. And then there's C.J. Miles again. C.J. slipped a little bit last year, but he and Paul Millsap used possessions at the exact same rate. Carlos Boozer, Kevin Garnett, O.J. Mayo, John Wall. Alec Burks is pretty close to high up here, by the way, worth noting. Andrew Bynum. That's where C.J. is. So I guess the idea that he's a secondary player behind the stars, but, I mean, the guy got on the floor and just unrelentingly used possessions. So I find it very hard to kind of buy into this idea that he was some secondary player. Other note for you, which I thought was nice to read. Let me see if I can pull this up. This was an article. There's a lot of articles recently suddenly about the Atlanta Hawks and how despite they traded Joe Johnson, they actually might be all right. And they might be. They actually, a bunch of things are showing them the second best team in the West. I kind of think that's Indiana. But it might not be New York and it might not be New Jersey. And Atlanta suddenly pops in there. I'll have to do some more work on this. Atlanta was sixth in the NBA last season points allowed per possession defensively, despite Al Horford's injury, which is a really interesting kind of note. It's really somewhat a tribute to Josh Smith, but this article comments that Marvin Williams, who functioned as Atlanta's primary defender against top-tier wings in many cases last season. And that gets to be pretty interesting because you suddenly realize that 6'9", with Hayward at 6'8", if they both are good defensive players, that's pretty fabulous. I am, we'll have to see. I don't know if I'm biased because I've known Marvin, watched him when he played high school or what, but we'll have to see whether he's as good as I think. I think he's by far the best player the Jazz have acquired. This led me to do one or two kind of quick searches. And they're never easy when you're searching for a Williams because there's 8 million of them who've ever played. But I thought, all right, Durant is the elite offensive player. If he was guarding Durant, which I would suspect if that's how they did it, what happened? So last year, Kevin Durant played Marvin Williams Atlanta once. He was 9 of 23 from the field. He did go to line 17 times. He had 35 points on 23 shots, which is pretty darn good. It was 17 free throw attempts, though, but he was 9 of 23 from the field. Marvin only played 29 of the 42 minutes he was on the floor. The previous matchup, Durant dropped 29 in 2011. Hard to know whether they matched up again. He was 10 of 18. The previous matchup to that, Durant went 9 of 18, went to the free throw line 14 times, had 33 points. So there has not been... Durant only shoots 44% in the 8 games in which they've played each other, but he lives at the line. So I thought that was, worth noting. It's hard to figure out who the next guy would be because Carmelo's in the East. I'm not sure that Kobe really works in that realm if that's who he's defending with World Meta Peace on the floor there. Though I'm not sure who else they would have had on that team trying to guard Kobe. I did look it up. It's hard. Again, it's very hard to know if this is a legitimate search on these head-to-heads. But the story on Kobe was that last year Kobe went 5 of 18 in the one meeting against Atlanta. Marvin was on the floor for a good deal of that game with him. Then the last time before that, Kobe went 8 of 18. He had 26. He went to the free throw line 11 times. Before that, he went 5 of 11. Went to the free throw line 8 times, had 20, 12 of 21. The other one that's noticed is on these games, Marvin is just a non-factor offensively. In games, and I don't know if his job is to guard him, but in 11 games which Marvin has played Kobe, he's shot 27%. Again, I don't know. Hey, with that time of season, we're searching for stuff. All right, let's switch the focus to football for a second. I had a fun time with Spence and Gordon the other day talking about Utah football. I want to talk BYU for a second. BYU to me under Bronco is a very easy program to understand. They're persistent. They execute. They're detailed. They play at a very high level for 60 minutes. That really the art of Bronco Mendenhall football to me is they play the entire 60 minutes. And in turn, whenever they play someone of lesser talent, they win. I mean, it's hard to go back and find a game where you look back and say, wow, they should have won that game. They don't have those games. So, I mean, you look at their schedule this year, Weber State, they win. Hawaii, they should win without much problem. I'm not sure where Utah State fits on that. Idaho, San Jose State, New Mexico. So there's the 5 wins. Then there's the middle tier team they play, which is the okay team. I mean, last year was probably a good example. Ole Miss was awful. Frankly, they played with them to the final minute on the road. Oregon State was not very good. They beat them. They handled them nicely. And that's kind of who BYU is. Like, they play these games, and they frankly win a lot of those games because they just play a more consistent 60 minutes of football. Last Texas wasn't great, but they were on the road last year, and they battled. UCF wasn't great last year, but they kind of played through that game longer. The Utah State game, they played the 60 minutes of those games. The problem is when they play a team that is athletically superior or talent-wise superior, and that's there. I've understood listening to some of the talk radio with Scott Gerard on 1280 The Zone. It's been brought up recently. I mean, there really is a huge talent difference between BYU and some of the big upper programs, best exemplified by just the complete dearth of any pro players at BYU. I mean, there have not Austin Collie recently, Dennis Pitta recently, but those guys are 7, 8 years probably now since they joined the program. There's been a lack, and there does seem to be maybe particularly on the offensive line a lack of development as well. I mean, Matt Reynolds, what happened? Every year we hear about this great offensive line, and it never is that great. So I kind of feel like whether that's just they're getting outmanned on the other side, there's a lack of development, or I don't know. There's a talent dearth. I mean, I don't know the reasons, and I'm probably not good enough to figure out why, or close enough to it to figure out why. But there is. So it gets interesting this year because I think Washington State. I mean, if you just go back to last year and say, okay, Ole Miss wasn't very good, but it's SEC talent. Clearly, BYU didn't have an advantage. They played a close game. They just outplayed them for 60 minutes. Washington State, I think, will be similar. And I suspect the big advantage BYU has in that game is that they'll have good leadership with Riley, and they'll play 60 minutes, and they'll play through it where Washington State's going to have a lot of uncertainty. Utah, Boise, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, there might be 4 games on the schedule where BYU is just out-talented and just has more talent than or has less talent than the team they're playing. And that's just something you can't overcome that, frankly. That's not on Bronco or anyone else. You just can't overcome that. So there's 4 games, and the real telling thing is going to be, okay, you're playing a bottom-tier Pac-12 team, you got to win it. You're playing a bottom-tier Pac-12 team in Oregon State, you got to find a way to win it. You're playing Utah, who's pretty darn good. Those middle, Washington State, Oregon State games, to me, are probably Utah State game, just because of the emotion on it, are probably the 3 games that determine this season. because I don't think it's a big stretch to figure Utah, Boise State, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech is 3 if not 4 losses. I mean, they're all on the road. So they could be pretty good and lose all 4. But you suddenly can't have lost 5 and 6 in the season. And they've, generally BYU's been brilliant at being able to get through those games. And we'll see again, and that's kind of to me been the signature of Bronco. Over on the Utah side, it's interesting to me. Utah, I follow Stanford very, very closely. Utah and Stanford, I keep reading about, seem very similar to me. Stanford's got a great defense returning. An inexperienced quarterback they know nothing about. Mums will get the start, or Nuns, excuse me. I got BYU mixed in there. Nuns will get the start. A little bit of a surprise. Everybody thought it was going to be the younger Nottingham. And if their quarterback doesn't play well, they're a 6 or 7 win team despite this great defense. And I kind of feel like that's where Utah is. You got to have a quarterback who limits mistakes, hits the open throws, makes some plays on third down, and hits an occasional deep ball. And I don't think people have forgotten this in any way at all. I mean, I think it's really clear that Kyle Whittingham has just been abundantly clear that the leash on Jordan Wynn is pretty short. But, if you think about Jordan Wynn has led 21 Pac-12 drives, only 3 of them for touchdowns. One of them was a 50-yard burst by John White against USC. He's led as many drives in the Pac-12 for turnovers as he has for touchdowns. He's had 4 3-and-outs of those 21, which you just can't have. You cannot have a 3-and-out drive. And more importantly than that, just a lot of, 6-play, 9-yard, 6-play, 14-yard drives. It's well documented. They didn't beat a particularly good team last year. In fact, if I was wondering today as I was preparing for this to talk to, their wins actually last year are against none of the teams other than Oregon State, I believe, that they beat last year in the bowl, excluding the bowl game, actually have their same coach back. The USC game was one of their better performances of the year. Because they got run by Washington, they got run by Arizona State, they got run by Cal, which I think is a little disturbing, and some of that had to do with the quarterback situation and some other things, but I guess they just better really get good quarterback play. You have to have 2 things to win the Pac-12. You have to have a great quarterback, and you got to have a stud defensive line that puts pressure on quarterbacks. Utah should have the second, similar to Stanford. Stanford should have the second. But if you don't get something out of your quarterback play, you're a 6, 7 win team. And it gets ugly early. And not to mention some of those games that I think kind of push one way or the other, though it feels like a lot of them do in the Pac-12. But that Arizona State, who should be a little different this year, and without Osweiler, be quite as good. UCLA, Oregon State, those games are games you really got to think you're going to win. Those are all on the road this year, right? If you look at the Utah schedule and you say we got to beat Arizona State, they're not as good as you got to beat UCLA and Morris first year. You got to beat Oregon State because they're just not very good. You got to beat Colorado, and you probably got to beat Arizona. I mean, those are your 5, right? And then Cal's going to be pretty good. You deal with that. That's at home. USC's great. Washington's on the road, that's a tough one. And Washington State, you should just win. So probably, of those 5 games, 4 of them are on the road. Jordan Wynn doesn't have many road wins in his life. And moreover than that, road wins are just hard to come by. I mean, in this conference, you just don't get a huge amount of road wins. That's probably the biggest difference between jumping to the Pac-12 and the Mountain West. In the Mountain West, you're just so much better than everyone. You just go in the road and win. Now, last year, give Utah credit. If I recall, they had 2 Pac-12 road wins and 4 overall road wins, and that might be the signature of Kyle Whittingham, just kind of how they're able to put it out every day, and that's But again, if I remember correctly, Washington State was one of them. Probably shouldn't have been as close as it was, but that's a good example of how hard it is. And Arizona had, I think, fired the coach the week before, right? Anyway, that's some thoughts. I think it's going to be interesting. The optimism's awesome, and if Wynn can put something together, then I think they're really good. And for BYU, there's a lot of fun stuff there as well. Sounds good. Talk to you guys later.